Hello, DMAC fam. Welcome to our time of catechesis. Catechesis is our process of growing in the gospel together through instruction and conversation. And our emphasis right now is on evangelism. So we've been talking about evangelism as the work of the church. And we've been using a framework that Nick Davis gave us called the gospel drop to kind of guide our conversation in this. And we started off talking about the gospel proclaimed, and we talked about the gospel as the power of God unto salvation. We talked about how the core of our evangelistic practice, if you will, as Christians, is in fact the gospel proclaimed in our Sunday gathering. And we talked about how part of our evangelistic practice can be inviting people to church, and so to hear the gospel proclaimed. So we talked a little bit more about that, and we're going to take that idea just a little bit further right now. We're talking about the gospel confirmed. So we talked about the gospel proclaimed, right, like the preached word, and now we're talking about the gospel confirmed in the sacraments. So here's our verse for that. We're talking about the Lord's Supper. This is 1 Corinthians chapter 11, beginning in verse 23 through verse 26. I'm going to read it to you right now. For I received from the Lord what I also delivered to you, that the Lord Jesus, on the night when he was betrayed, took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it, and said, "This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way also he took the cup after supper, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this as often as you drink it, in remembrance of me. For as often as you eat this bread and drink the cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes." So what we want to think about today is, okay, if we're inviting someone to church, maybe to hear the gospel proclaimed, and hopefully so that we'll hear the gospel, so that we will be evangelized as well, in kind of an ongoing way, how do the sacraments confirm what we've just heard proclaimed from the scriptures? So here in 1 Corinthians, Paul says, when we do this, we proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. Well, talk about that. How does what we do at the table reflect, proclaim, reinforce, confirm what we just heard proclaimed in the preaching? In other words, another way to think of it might be like this. How do we see with our eyes what we just heard with our ears when we come to the table? Think too about baptism. We just had a baptism this last week. What in that was evangelizing to you and maybe to guests that were there? Think about that. Talk about that together and bring it to the Lord, and let's see what he has to teach us about how the sacraments confirm the gospel proclaimed.